Good morning, everyone. I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, a nonpartisan international affairs think tank working to shape the global future with allies and partners. Wherever you are in the world, in the afternoon in Europe, late in Asia, I would like to formally welcome you to this exciting event, Innovation in the Future of Energy. This event pulls together several key themes that are at the heart of the Atlantic Council Global Energy work. I'll briefly mention just three of them. Number one, ensuring that the energy transition is a just transition for all workers in the energy sector. Number two, decarbonizing the power sector and reaching climate targets. And number three, examining the crucial roles of everyone involved in these efforts, from tech innovators to labor unions to policy advocates. So let's move on to the program. It is my great honor to welcome Senator Joe Manchin, the Democratic senator from the great state of West Virginia. Sorry about that, Senator Manchin. I knew it was West Virginia. But it's good to invite you back to the Atlantic Council. It seems like just yesterday, 2016, that Senator Manchin, you and our former chairman, Governor John Huntsman, we were all together in Poland after another election. And speaking about NATO and world affairs, you're quite literally at the middle of congressional leadership about a host of issues, and you embody the Atlantic Council's bipartisan commitment to national and global affairs. So thank you so much for being here. I'm also delighted to welcome Jeff Lyash, President and CEO of the Tennessee Valley Authority, to the Atlantic Council this morning. I'm looking forward to their chat and the panel discussion that will follow. So now it's my pleasure to pass the mic to George Frampton, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center. George will introduce and moderate. Thank you to everyone for being here in the United States, Europe, and around the world, and I look forward to an excellent conversation. George, over to you.
Thank you, Fred. And thank all of you for joining us. I'm George Frampton. I'm a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and this morning I'll be moderating a fireside chat and a separate panel discussion, both of which will focus on how the energy transition that's accelerating under the new administration can become at the same time a driver for economic development and job creation, particularly in communities that are likely to be most impacted, like Appalachia and the Tennessee Valley. Before we get started this morning, a little housekeeping. This event is on the record. We're live streaming to Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. We encourage you to post about today's discussion and share on social media using the hashtag #ACEnergy and tagging us at AC Global Energy. Those who are on Zoom can submit questions in the Q&A portal located at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So I'm delighted to introduce the two speakers for the fireside chat. Senator Manchin, West Virginia, two-term governor, was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2010. He chairs the Senate Energy Committee, serves also on Appropriations, Armed Services, and Veterans Committee, the proud grandfather, I believe, of 9 grandchildren, and as most of you are well aware, currently a very strong leading voice for bipartisanship in the US Congress. Jeff Lyash has been president and CEO of TVA since 2019. He previously had senior management positions at Progress Energy, Duke Power, Chicago Bridge and Iron. Before coming to TVA, was president and CEO of Ontario Power. And Jeff, I guess you actually went through an energy transition there that got you probably as close to zero emissions as any utility in the United States, at least more than 95% of the way. So let's get started. Senator Manchin, I'd like to turn to you first and ask you about President Biden's new White House Interagency Working Group on Coal and Power Plant Communities and Economic Revitalization. A new entity based at DOE just released their initial report last Friday, focusing on 25 coal-impacted communities, and named a West Virginian to run it, identified both existing and new sources of funding for Appalachia. You've worked hard on these issues. You've talked a lot about what we owe coal workers and coal communities who made the country prosperous. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of investing in coal communities now and what you're looking for from this new working group? Can they make a real difference here?
Well, I sure think so, George. First of all, it's good to be with you, and it's always good to be with Jeff. And I got to know Jeff a little bit, and he came and appeared before our committee and did a wonderful job explaining TVA and the diverse energy portfolio they have and how it works. And I was enthralled with that. But speaking about what's going on in the president's plan, investing in these communities who really believe they've been left behind. And so I'm very pleased that the president understands no community, and especially those who have contributed so much to our country, the freedoms that we've been able to endure and persevere with have been because of the hard work that the coal miners have done over the years, providing the energy that we've needed, and basically made us the country that we are, the superpower of the world. So I've been very pleased that they've acknowledged that. Now, how do you do it and how do you accomplish it? It's going to be hard to replace a job coming from the coal mines directly, the amount of pay and the ancillary jobs that support one coal mining job. I don't think that is going to happen. So with that, we're going to be quite a diverse portfolio. I'm more concerned, George, about the way we're depending upon transforming this energy portfolio of ours, because we do very little manufacturing of solar panels. We do very little manufacturing of windmills. We're depending on foreign supply chains. So are they going to be assembly jobs? There's a lot of questions that need to be asked, need to be answered. So I'm very much want to be enlightened by that. I'm very much interested in that, but I also am a realist, understanding that a person making $80,000 to $100,000 working in a coal mine and also working in a machine shop or a battery factory or a cable shop that pays top wages. I want to see the comparison of those coming from a transitional type of energy plan. So that's all yet to be seen. I'm very open-minded. I want to work with everybody. We've got to find a pathway forward. There's a transition that's happening. We've lost 50% of our thermal coal production within the last 10 years. Never have we seen a decline such as that. So it's happening, whether people want to believe it or not, or accept it or not. It's going to happen because the markets are demanding different forms of energy. We want to make sure that we don't leave West Virginia behind. We want to make sure they have opportunities, and also the cultural areas where they live, their families and their homesteads and home life. They want to continue that if possible. So we're going to do all we can to make that happen.
Senator, thank you. Let me ask Jeff about follow on to what you were just talking about, training people for new jobs. The TVA, Jeff, is a unique entity founded in part to promote economic development in the Tennessee Valley and Appalachia. Is there a new role for TVA here? Like the role for which it was founded in the 30s, to be a driver of economic development and job creation through this new energy transition? And if so, what would TVA have to do that's different or new to be a big part of that?
Yeah, George, new role, the same as the old role, frankly. TVA will be 88 years old in May, and we were put in place by a Democrat president from New York, Franklin Roosevelt, and a Republican senator from Nebraska, George Norris, who had no stake in the Tennessee Valley, but saw a struggling part of the country, Appalachia and the Tennessee Valley, and really wanted to do something for the people and the communities here. And so TVA has three principal missions: energy, plentiful, reliable, resilient, low cost; environmental stewardship, protecting land, water, air, and contemporarily here, driving down greenhouse gas emissions; and economic development, attracting capital and jobs. So the question you ask about, it's at the heart of TVA's mission. And so we focus in cooperation with all the other economic development parties in the region at doing just that, attracting jobs and capital. As a matter of fact, in the last 5 years, we've attracted about $47 billion in capital and helped to attract or retain about 340,000 jobs. And part of what we're doing here in this topic we talk about is helping to attract that capital and jobs and create the jobs of the future here in the Tennessee Valley so that there are places for existing workforce to transition to. So for example, we helped recruit General Motors electric vehicle platform here. We recently were part of an announcement that LG will site their Ultium battery manufacturing facility that will supply GM. So we focus on creating jobs associated with these future energy infrastructure issues. But to Senator Manchin's point specifically, you know, we've had to retire about 60% of our coal generation already. And our coal units will continue to retire over the next 15 years because they've reached the end of life for those facilities. And there, our role is to help that workforce gain new job skills and transition to new employment, hopefully with TVA. We've been very successful with doing that. But just as importantly, work on economic development with those communities where those jobs and those that asset is retiring to attract jobs and capitals to replace it. And you know, a couple of examples I can give you of successes were we constructed new high efficiency gas generation units on the site of our Allen and our Paradise coal units when they retired to preserve that tax base and at least a significant part of those jobs. At our Widows Creek coal unit, we helped attract Google, a data center, actually a significant net increase in jobs, and we built solar facilities there. So, you know, we see our role as helping to make this energy transition while keeping prices low and reliability high and helping to transition to this new energy economy for not only our employees, but the communities we serve.
Jeff, I've seen that the TVA is beginning to try to attract new large industrial customers and keep old ones with new solar. But the question is, what are those? Let's talk for a minute about those jobs. Senator Manchin, you just very recently endorsed the PRO Act, Protecting Organizing Act. And can you, that's a major, going to be a major issue about the ability of these industries to unionize. You want to say something about how you see this kind of legislation in the energy industry as well as in Appalachia?
You know, I've always believed that the worker had a right to organize if they felt they needed it and they had the ability. The thing that really upset me more, George, and why I got onto the PRO Act is in the last few years, 50% of those workers who have organized and voted to organize in their workplace have been denied a bargaining agreement. Won't even sit down and negotiate with them. Something's wrong there. Something is wrong because whatever conditions they felt they needed to be organized to protect against, they didn't have a chance. And we've got to make sure that we correct that. With that, we're talking about the good paying jobs. You know, the mining jobs have all been good paying. Most of them were union jobs way back when. They started transforming to basically a split between union and non-union in the 80s and 90s. But with that, the pay basically had already been set by the unions, and it was basically continued. And the high quality of pay and the good benefit packages have continued with those types of jobs. You know, there's so much going on right now that's coming at us in so many different ways in Washington. And for people basically to say, well, we've got to put one big package together, which is going to be what we call an omnibus package, George, in this infrastructure bill. I think that we should be separating these and looking at infrastructure traditionally as we know infrastructure, looking at human infrastructure as we know the needs of humans, have a better opportunity and quality of life. And we're trying to look at those in a different form rather than throwing them all together because they become convoluted. Which one you put more value on? Which one would you support, even though you don't like some of the things in it? I don't think we should be put in that position. And if we work hard, we have time to correct that. But energy plays a big part. And I'll give you a perfect example. We have, by 2035, the president wants to be to zero emissions in the power sector, I think you know. They want 2050 as a time to be zero emissions economy wide. That means everything that we do, which is our transportation, our factories, our homes, and everything. But by 2035, to meet that emission, we have 5 nuclear reactors that are going to go offline this year. We've got 5.1 gigawatts of zero emission energy going offline. And I think Jeff will tell you, if you put a little attention, a little TLC, these plants have much longer extended lives than a coal-fired plant. And if you look at the coal-fired plants being built around the world, and they want to stick their head in the sand, George. Basically, as we speak right now, there's 1,063 coal-fired plants being built around the world. 1,063, not one in America. There's 6,600 operating today. When this new plants are completed, that'll be 7,666 coal-fired plants in the world. We're still at 504. And they make you believe that every coal-fired plant is polluting the whole world in America. This is absolutely what we're dealing with. It makes no sense. They're not dealing with reality. So if you want to basically clean up global climate, and I know I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I have to, George, because they're not dealing with the facts. I said, you're entitled to your opinion. You're just not entitled to create your own facts to support your opinions. And what we're trying to do is put the facts out here. Carbon capture sequestration technology is the way we must go if you want to really help the climate, global climate. And Dr. Briol, the head of the IEA, International Energy Agency, has said that. And these facts prove it out. There's more fossil going to be used than ever in the world. Not in America, but in the world. So I don't know why we think that if we import all of our rare earth minerals from different foreign suppliers, that we're going to be batteries and be clean. We're putting our transportation, our entire transportation, we want to transform that to EVs. And we don't basically have the material to produce EV batteries. And if you think with the permitting process that we have to go through in America to do any mining of lithium or any of the rare earth minerals, we'll never get there. We'll always be dependent. I want people to be to meet reality head on in the real world. And that's what my job as now energy chairman. And you can imagine on my side of the aisle, that's a heavy lift.
Senator, I think I'd love to come back in a moment if we have time to the supply chain issues, but going to Jeff, I know that you've just recently written a letter to President Biden asking that existing fleet to be kept is essential.
And he's been receptive to that, George, also. He's been receptive to that, but they need to take action now because that's 5.1 gigawatts of power, which is zero emission right now coming offline. Jeff knows, as the largest fleet of nuclear in the country, he can probably speak to this better than I can, but I would think those plants could be kept running, Jeff, if we have the desire to do it.
Right. Jeff, you have a nuclear background, and all of the utilities you've worked at in the past have had very diverse set of production assets, including nuclear. You testified recently about nuclear innovation. I wonder what your sort of view is of not only TVA's existing fleet, but the possibility of small modular reactors and other new technologies in that part of the country particularly.
Yeah, and I've got to agree with Senator Manchin here in the way he characterized this. I mean, if I just look at TVA for a minute, we have reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 63% over the 2005 benchmark as of 2020. We're executing a plan to get to 70% by 2030, 80% by 2035 with existing technology and without raising price or adversely impacting reliability. So we're driving as hard as we can. But we cannot even attain those numbers unless we preserve and extend the life of our existing nuclear fleet. And one of the technologies that we need to establish to close that gap between 80% and 100% reduction, they are energy storage, carbon capture that we can apply to our remaining fossil fuel plants, including gas, as Senator Manchin mentioned, and new nuclear in the form of small modular reactors. It's the path to attain the objectives we've set out. And, I would suggest to the audience that the first priority is to preserve and extend the valuable nuclear fleet we have running in this country by addressing the dysfunctions in the organized markets and in the revenue models that we've set up that inappropriately disadvantage these very, very valuable plants. We need them to address our long-term carbon goals. But just preserving the existing fleet and extending its life isn't enough. We need new low carbon energy generation resources. And of course that means renewables, solar, wind, as much of that as the system can integrate, but there are limitations to that. We need storage to help that integration, yes, but we need new nuclear in order to be able to not only close the gap, but generate the energy that's going to be demanded as we electrify the economy, including transportation, and to be able to produce that in a low carbon method. And that's where I see small modular reactors. And I would tell you, there are technologies ready to build now, light water small modular reactors. There are generation 4 SMRs, like the liquid sodium and molten chloride salt and high temperature gas cooled reactors that are being developed by countries right here. And supporting those first of a kind, which takes government support. First of a kind risk and cost are substantial, but the investment in that will generate the solution to the low carbon future and create an export for the US to help address others around the world who, as Senator Manchin pointed out, are making less progress than we are to attain that goal, I think is very important. And TVA's got our Clinch River site. It's got the only early site permit for a small modular reactor. TVA is ready to lead in this area if the nation needs it to lead. And our focus will be preserving the existing fleet, extending it, and with the right level of support, we can build small modular reactors as a lead plant at the Clinch River site.
Jeff, thanks. I think we only have a minute or two left for this chat, but you may be aware that the Montana State Legislature has just asked for a study about putting small modular reactors or other Gen 4 reactors into decommissioned coal plants. Is that something that is worth studying, you think makes sense? And if so, should TVA or Senator, should there be more sort of DOE attention to this possibility? Maybe if you can just give me a minute and then we'll have to wind up on that. Senator,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Senator.
Go ahead. No, Jeff, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, one of the advantages of small modular reactors is built in the factory, deployed to the site, lower risk, shorter construction schedule once it's fully developed, and in 300 megawatt size bites, which are easily integrated into the transmission system. And yeah, existing coal sites were picked for a reason. Good geology, water, they're tied into the transmission system. And so I see those sites as very viable SMR sites. This is a way to replace those resources with carbon-free resources, do it in a way that creates more capital investment and better jobs with a lot of durability. And I think this has got to be part of the nation's plan going forward.
Right.
Well, and everything, George, everything Jeff has said is absolutely accurate. If you go through West Virginia, some of our better sites, manufacturing sites, are the coal-fired plants that we've had because of all the things Jeff just mentioned. Access to water tied into the existing grid system. You could come online much quicker, and we could accomplish this in a much faster rate than anything else we would do if you start over. Bill Gates has been very much involved in all this. He's come to our committee. He's spoken to me quite a few times. And it's really exciting to see the opportunities that we would have.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you both for doing this. One quick comment, Senator, you mentioned carbon capture and storage. I'm sure you saw that the interagency work is trying to produce a very large amount of potential old DOE loan guarantee program money for carbon capture and storage. That's a big deal.
Well, George, we put basically $6 billion last year, and I want to repeat this. We put $6 billion because we were practical in seeing what needed to be done. In the United States of America, coal, and I tell you this, the coal areas would be a perfect place to manufacture the new technology for carbon capture sequestration. And how do we create a revenue or a valued stream from the carbon that we're able to take off? We know that we can solidify clear-stream carbon. We know we can pressurize it. Can we do more? Well, we're liquefying it. Now we need to solidify it. Can we use it for different added values? But I am totally engaged in this. I want it to work. And we put $6 billion. And I've said this, that basically you are not going to eliminate your way to a cleaner environment, but you can innovate your way worldwide to a cleaner environment. And that's what we have to be receptive of. We have to be practical, and we all have to work together rather than this divide. And one more thing, George, I've been all over the Arctic, the 8 different nations that basically make up the Arctic. And we did a whole tour of that right before the pandemic hit, Lisa Murkowski, our energy committee. And I walked away with one understanding, is that we are the only country that uses climate as a political divide. The other 7 have embraced it and know they must change.
Jeff, Senator, thank you very much. This sounds like the beginning of a 2-hour discussion, but we have to wrap this up. I hope maybe there's a chance to come back to it in the not too distant future. Thank you both for participating.
Thank you. Good seeing you again, Jeff. Let's get
George,
together.
thank you. Great to see you, Senator. Love to have you down here in the Valley for a visit.
Let's do it.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to move now to the panel. Thank you again, Senator and President Layash, for a fascinating conversation. And I'm going to introduce our 5 panelists, starting with George Bilicic, Vice Chairman of Investment Banking and Global Head of Power, Energy, and Infrastructure for Lazard. George just authored an independent report by Lazard, which is a company that's been prominent in analyzing the U.S. power sector over the last several decades, on how TVA is actually meeting its strategic goals. J.T. Young is President and Chief Executive Officer of Memphis Light, Gas, and Water, the largest of 153 local power companies, municipals, cooperatives that are served by TVA. Karen Shelton, just appointed Senior Advisor to Secretary of Energy Granholm, a Californian, worked in the Clinton administration, has long worked in sustainable energy, environment, and land issues, and issues relating to working women, a famous documentary. Brent Booker, Secretary Treasurer of North America's Building Trades Unions. NABTU actually comprises 14 unions altogether, representing over 3 million skilled craft workers, and is the largest union in the TVA area. And Maria Korsnick, President and CEO of the Nuclear Energy Institute. She also has a nuclear background, was a senior management official at Constellation, and then Exelon, running nuclear operations, before she came to NEI as a chief operating officer, and now over the last few years, the CEO of the organization. So I'm going to start with George and start asking about power sector transition. What role do you see TVA as a huge public power company playing in meeting decarbonization goals that are pretty ambitious that this new administration just announced?
Thanks, George. It's a great first name, by the way. So TVA's already played a great role in the evolution through the evolution of its generation fleet, including the use of nuclear and the transformation of its coal fleet into something different. Jeff Layash described a lot of the accomplishments in this regard and their goals going forward. Our view at Lazard is that going forward, to reach power sector decarbonization goals and broader environmental goals, a lot of things need to be done. We need solar, wind, energy efficiency. The bridge fuel of natural gas is still going to be critical. Nuclear is important, as the Senator and Jeff Lyash were describing. The new nuclear alternative is quite interesting in the SMR area. Hydrogen in the longer term, very expensive in the near term. EVs, energy storage, carbon capture, all of this is necessary. It's a new all of the above, if you remember that terminology from 7 to 10 years ago around generation resource diversity. TVA has shown itself to be a leader in the area. Our report says that, and you would expect that to continue on a going forward basis, particularly in the nuclear area, but also in the all of the above category of things. And it's going to take all of these arrows we have in our quiver to decarbonize the way we all want things to happen.
Thank you. Let me turn to JT Young. From the point of view of municipal, cooperative, local power providers, when you don't generate the electricity, but you provide it, distribute it and provide it, when you look at issues surrounding the decarbonization of the energy sector in general, what are the considerations that you have to think about? And JT, what are the things that your customers think about and you hear from your customers?
Yeah, thank you, George, and good morning. You hit the nail on the head. I think for us, it's really all about our customers. And one of the things that we have to think about is the importance. Customers expect resilience in their supply. They expect reliability. They expect affordability. So those factors are critical for our customers. So as we think about this transitioning and decarbonization, we have to always keep at the forefront the importance of those factors. Customers want power all the time. They want it to be reasonably priced, affordable, and more today, customers are cognizant of the issues around climate, and we can't ignore that. That's a reality. So we must stay engaged, and some of the things you heard Jeff mention this morning and the Senator mentioned this morning are critical to our customers because workforce needs are important. Just energy, making sure that there's fairness as we make this transition so that customers can afford the type of energy that they expect so that the quality of their lives can be what it should be moving forward in this new economy.
Thank you. Karen, this interagency working group is at the heart of what we're talking about today, how to make a energy transition, which is very ambitious, also into an economic driver and create good jobs, well-paying jobs. How did this come together, and how does the administration see this interagency working group making a difference compared to the way things have been done in the past?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, George, and thank you to the Atlantic Council. And, Senator Manchin and Jeff Lyash really, from the president's point of view, I could say, and the Secretary of Energy's point of view, really hit it out of the ballpark when it comes to talking about this report. The report, as you know, came out of an executive order that the president signed in just his first week in office. And in that executive order, he asked for an interagency working group to be stood up, co-chaired by Brian Deese, who is the head of the National Economic Council, and Gina McCarthy, who is the head of the White House Climate Office, and administered by Secretary Granholm. I think that the level of leadership shows the level of commitment that the president has to partnering with these energy communities, fossil dependent, that are going to be transformed over time. And the way that the interagency working group, looked at this issue is the same in many ways that the timber industry was looked at in, its day, or the end of closing of base closures, 20 years ago when you and I served in the Clinton administration. It's a short-term problem and it's a long-term problem. It's both. The working group issued its report publicly last Friday, and it had three primary findings in it. The first finding was really a cataloging of available resources in the federal government that could be applied for, could be relevant to building good jobs, revitalizing communities in these fossil dependent areas in the United States. And we came up with about $38 billion worth of existing funding that could be available. The second finding is that the report looked at identified 25 hard-hit communities in the United States that should serve as the priority for interventions by the federal government. So this is a government-wide approach. The working group had 11 agencies involved in it. Those agencies now ought to prioritize their investments in coal communities based on this priority list of 25 places. And finally, the report looked at very aggressive next steps to begin working tomorrow on getting into those communities, having senior members of the administration travel to them, hear from people, stakeholders on the ground. Every one of these communities is different. As much as they're fossil dependent, they're all very different, have different assets and needs. And so we're going to get in there. This is going to be run by, as you said in the beginning, a West Virginian, Brian Anderson, who currently heads up as the director of the National Energy Technology Lab and is based in West Virginia and comes from coal miner families. And we think he'll be just fabulous in taking this on.
Karen, just a comment from work that a little bit of work I've done over the last couple of years on just transition, trying to help local leaders and communities with innovative ideas in Appalachia be heard in Washington. You know, the history of this is that local people feel they don't really have a seat at the table. Things are made up in Washington and then they're asked to support it. I see that the interagency working group wants to do town hall meetings and meet with local people. I think that's a change, and that's terrific.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Let me ask Brett, on your website, I noticed that the National Building Trades Association, Building Trades Unions has energy infrastructure as a really important issue up there. How do you, and you're have a huge number of members in the area, in the Tennessee Valley, Appalachia, where the most prominent single group of union employees. How do you see the energy transition as impacting union labor, and what do you see are the opportunities and the challenges there for you, for your people?
Right, and thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you all today. And you know, we do put that on our website because over 50% of our hours in the building trades come from the energy sector today. And we are, you know, the simple answer to your question is, it was mentioned by Jeff and the senator and other speakers about the existing nuclear fleet, and to preserve that the best we can. Zero carbon emissions, the number of jobs, good paying jobs, middle class jobs, which I know is important to the Biden administration to do that, you know, to put policies in place to preserve the existing fleet and then look at what is the transition look like, and what fuel sources are we looking at, whether it's SMRs, using natural gas as a fuel for the coming decades. You go back to 2008, 2009 when the economy crashed. What kept our members alive, what kept food on their table, and what kept them being able to function, especially in Appalachia and in the Valley, was the exploration of shale. In West Virginia and Pennsylvania and Ohio, and not only finding the shale, but then transporting it to then start building new combined cycle power plants that were replacing the existing fleet of coal. So knowing that natural gas is going to be this bridge fuel as we get into the renewable industry to preserve those jobs. Those are good jobs. The energy sector, the nuclear energy sector, the coal energy sector, the natural gas energy sector, are unionized for the most part in most of the country. And when we say unionized, it means that a middle-class living wage where the workers that we represent have a health care, have a pension, and have a living wage to support their family and support their community. So when you see a facility get shut down, it has a devastating impact on that local community. And one of the things that we have done and will continue to do is partner with TVA and others in the utility industry through our apprenticeship programs, our apprenticeship readiness programs. Reach out to what we call the underserved communities. That could mean transitioning military, that could mean African American, Latino, it could mean rural communities in the valley, to provide them opportunities to get into our world-class training centers, to give them the skills that they need to then start working on hopefully the existing nuclear fleet, as well as natural gas for the coming decades, and as we approach the renewable world as well.
Thank you, Maria. We heard of a lot of advocacy here for both extending the longevity of the existing fleet, which provides 20% or perhaps a little more given the year of all of our carbon-free power in the country, and the importance of new designs, whether smaller or modular or new generation. What is maybe you can talk for a few moments about what the nuclear industry is looking for from the new administration, and how that fits into the whole Biden decarbonization energy transition plan.
Well, thank you very much. And yes, a lot of positive conversation here today relative to nuclear. We're really grateful to Senator Manchin for his support of the existing fleet of nuclear reactors. The U.S. nuclear fleet is the world's largest source of firm, clean generation today. In the United States, only 0.5% of all the power plants are nuclear. And yet nuclear provides the grid with 20% of our total electricity. These plants are carbon-free workhorses, and they're sending more than half of our country's carbon-free electricity to the grid. So as we look ahead, nuclear energy should be the carbon-free backbone of our energy future. And we simply cannot meet the aggressive decarbonization goals set by world leaders without nuclear energy. And it's the firm partner, if you will, clean energy source that wind and solar need to play with. So what's more, the IEA looked at the role of nuclear energy in decarbonization and found that preserving the existing nuclear generation is in fact the least expensive way to keep carbon off the grid. So with our existing reactors seeking second license renewals, that gives them another 20 years of operation. And then the next generation of reactors coming online later this decade, we are really poised to support the growing demand for energy in the United States and abroad. And you've talked a little bit, some of the other folks have mentioned, as we look at nuclear today, you think of it as the large plant, and there's going to be needs for those large gigawatt-sized reactors. But as they also come in these smaller packages, they are going to pair very nicely. Some people are even thinking about where you have a coal plant today, especially if it's a relatively newer coal plant, you could even use the secondary side of that coal plant potentially and just replace, if you will, the generating source with nuclear. And that could considerably reduce the cost as well. So I think as we put our mind to making that sort of coal to nuclear transition, I'd also like to point out that the jobs from a coal to nuclear perspective, I ran nuclear plants in my past. We would invite the fossil fuel folks to come down and help us with our refueling outages. So we are very comfortable working hand in glove with the fossil fuel folks, very high job skills, lots of transferability. So as we transition from a coal base to a nuclear base, think of a lot of those jobs coming right over and being retrained and redeployed at the nuclear plant. So it's a wonderful connectivity between the skill set that the coal fleet has today with what the nuclear fleet of tomorrow will need.
Thank you. George, coming back to you on this subject of focusing more on job creation, how does, following up on Jeff's discussion about the historic and the new role of TVA, what are the specific things that TVA can do to sort of up its game as a job creator and economic engine in terms of its existing strategic goals. That's one of the strategic goals of TVA. How does it enhance that role?
So the general area is a great opportunity for our country and for elsewhere in the world. A ton of what makes sense now is low cost and efficient. And as it is deployed in the energy transition, it creates new investment in jobs. Utilities, including the TVA, are well equipped to spend the dollars necessary for the energy transition and hire workers. There's high velocity of the dollar spent and a multiplier effect into the economy that maybe is underappreciated. And you look at the history of the TVA and you can see it as they spent their capital over time and help support economic stability in the region. This whole area is also something that should be impactful and beneficial for our country as we inevitably deal with the economic scarring of the global pandemic in the Valley and elsewhere. And I thought the Senator's observation about his travels pre-global pandemic and noting that everywhere but in this country, climate is not a political divider. It's going to be important to remember, though, as we look at this opportunity to support economic development, in the Valley and elsewhere, that we're going to need to watch some of the permitting and other investment impediments that exist in the system to protect different stakeholder interests, and rightfully so. But there needs to be a little bit more of a balance so the money can be spent. Senator Manchin also mentioned that in a different context. We're also going to need to watch, as one of the panelists has commented upon, and or two of the panelists have commented upon, is the dislocation that is going to come with the energy transition beyond just shutting down coal-fired power plants. And TVA is an incredible case study for the linkage of spending in the electricity system and in the energy transition and economic development. It's on top of its mission. It's, the TVA, in our view, at our firm, is a spectacular case study in that regard, and for the opportunities countrywide in linking energy transition to economic development.
Thank you. One of the lessons I think that's been communicated from other countries like Germany and Britain, who've been through a major coal transition, almost in the case of the UK to zero, and in the case of Germany to a phase out of hard coal, now planned for soft coal, is that it's very hard to try to bring in something completely different and large in the way of new industries to these communities. You have to start with the community's own strengths, indigenous strengths. Even though they may be small, those assets have to be built up rather than replaced. And with that thought, I wanted to ask JT about, you are a organization, you have a customer base. How do you think that the actual providers, munis and municipal utilities, can contribute to trying to identify and build up what are the natural strengths in communities that are losing jobs because of the energy transition and need to find new pathways? Is there a role for organizations like yours, companies like yours?
Yeah, absolutely, George. I believe there's a role, and in fact, we've been playing a role in that regard for decades, partnering with TVA, partnering with local chambers around the community, with our municipal partners here in the Memphis, Shelby County area. And that is critical because energy is not optional. And so what we have to remember is, and utilities are just so integrated into the fabric of the communities that when it becomes, and it's not just bringing in large companies to the community, it's also assisting existing industries, existing businesses, and even in fact, small businesses. One of the things that our team has done, for example, during the pandemic was engaging with some of our small businesses to do what's called a power pivot opportunity to sort of engage with our small business customers, to connect them with resources so that they can be successful throughout the pandemic. Another thing you heard a lot of discussion about on the jobs front, as we think about transitioning this whole, this industry, we have to be really engaged at the utility level at assisting from a training and development. We have to consider the pipeline. We have to be engaged with educational partners. We have to be engaged with all of our community partners so that we can make sure that there are jobs available and training for those folks who need to move into those jobs so that they can be successful in this new day. And so I think utilities like MLGW and others who have been able to take advantage of many of the programs, for example, that TVA offers from an economic development standpoint, leverage those benefits and use that platform to really grow the industry locally. And when all the local industries, local communities grow, the rising tide floats all boats. So we're blessed to be in this particular situation. So it's a great opportunity.
Let me pass that issue to Brent, because traditionally the need for training and retraining is served remarkably well by apprenticeship programs. One of the really strong parts of the whole history of the building trades unions. What's the current status of apprenticeship programs in your unions, and can they be strengthened and enhanced? And how would you seek outside assistance or aid to do that, as well as inside to try to beef up that training process?
Right, and currently, collectively, we spend over $1 billion a year in training through our registered apprenticeship programs, collectively through all of our 14 affiliated unions. So we make the investments every year. I think we're second to the United States military as far as training American citizens every year, right? And we would be one of the third or fourth largest colleges or universities if you look at just the raw numbers of people we train. We make the investments. Those are joint labor management boards that do the training. One thing that we could use for is, and one thing that we do need, is that when the federal government and legislators are putting forward legislation talking about, specifically in the renewable industry, and as we transition into the renewable energy, is to make sure that we do have labor standards attached to that, so that we do have prevailing wages. When the federal government provides tax credits to the renewable industry, prevailing wages need to be attached to that. There needs to be an attachment of a registered apprenticeship to make sure that the workers are being trained and through the registered apprenticeship system that is open to anybody, but we do a lot of that, right? And also making sure that it's local hire. What we don't want to have is a workforce coming into Appalachia, to the Valley, or anywhere else that isn't from Appalachia, the Valley, or anywhere else. And to use our existing training network to do that. So those are things that we can put, among others, from a supply chain, from a manufacturing chain that the senator talked about earlier, to bring manufacturing back in the United States, partner that with our existing training infrastructure, modernize, the workforce to go after that, but make sure that these are good jobs. And our recent experience in the renewable field of wind and solar, it's not comparatively economically for the members I represent, working off of an existing nuclear, coal, or gas plant into building a wind farm or a solar field. The economics aren't the same. So that's something that we need to work on with legislators, to put those safeguards in there to make sure that when American taxpayers' money is involved, that the workforce is taken care of as well.
Karen, let me ask you about the role of training and retraining in the interagency task force. Of the 25 communities that you identified, the first 4 are in Appalachia, and 4 of the other 21 are, 8 altogether, even if you don't count Southern Illinois. But the history of economic development in Appalachia has been, pretty problematic, and even worker training programs often train people, you hear, for jobs that they have to leave the community to get someplace else.
Yeah.
How do you think, what can the interagency task force, which is really based on all the people who do these programs together, how do you meet that challenge?
Yeah. I mean, as you say, George, and as Brent just laid out and everybody else, I mean, this is a legendary problem. This is a challenge of transitioning economies that has existed for a very long time. One of the opportunities that we have now is that there is an explosion in innovative technologies that didn't exist before. And I don't want to suggest that the president or the secretary or Gina or Brian think that there's an easy answer here. This is a very challenging set of circumstances, but we have some opportunities. So, for example, the question about whether carbon can be transitioned into hardened, as the senator said, and transitioned into products like cement or magnets. What can we do with hydrogen and turning it into blue hydrogen or green hydrogen? The skill used to do the pipe fitting for those kind of jobs are very similar to the skill set that exists in the mining community now. We're looking, the New York Times came out with a story this weekend, and it was reiterated by some mapping today in the paper about methane leaks and the opportunity there to bring in skilled workers. Of course, we have to start with the transportation sector and how that's becoming decarbonized and the kinds of work that's involved in making batteries and all those supply chain issues. There's, as you said, George, there is no single silver bullet here. And so the president's report looks at just transitions from a couple of key elements. One is to look at the community as a whole. So the community is workers. The community is also those workers' families and children who go to school. If the tax base is affected, how can we keep and retain good families in these communities? What does the infrastructure of these communities look like that are required to attract investors and corporations and businesses who want to relocate? And looking at the fence line areas adjacent to these communities that have been affected by the environmental degradation of the activities. So this working group is very hopeful that the jobs plan will pass and that the resources will be multiplied and able to be deployed into places like West Virginia and other Appalachian communities and everywhere across the country that is going to face this kind of transition. In addition to the resources that go into training and retraining and other things that help workers transition.
Yeah, thank you. Maria, let me turn back to you and ask about what you think, whether the Biden administration, one of the problems about our new nuclear is that our licensing and safety system is set up for one set of technologies, and we've never adjusted it to begin to evaluate another set of technologies, which is why some of the people who are most far advanced are getting new design reactors approved in Canada or someplace else, because the Canadians have a system that's more flexible than ours. Are there things here that the administration can do that promote not just funding, but promote the possibility of evaluating and trying out small reactors and new models in places like the Tennessee Valley and Appalachia, for example?
Yeah, I appreciate your question. And we're very much looking for the Biden administration, as we talked, not only to encourage the continuation of the current fleet, but to encourage that R&D and bring to market that next generation. And we're getting some positive signals. You mentioned specifically the regulatory framework, and where there are improvements, and we are working to sort of encourage in regulatory space maybe a more efficient way But I can tell you that these new designs are able to use the current regulatory framework and come to market. And so you've recently heard about the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Project that DOE announced last year. And there's 2 makes and models that are going through that process to come online by the end of the 2020s. NuScale has an SMR design that's gone through the regulatory process, and that can be built here in the 2020s. And there's other designs as well that are poised to be brought here in the 2020s. So when we talk about new nuclear, I don't want it to feel very far away. I want it to feel very close. And so it's this opportunity, if you will, to encourage that investment, that final R&D and sort of first of a kind investment, like Jeff Lyash mentioned, to bring these critical models to the market. I think nuclear really needs an opportunity to demonstrate. We talk about them being small modular and for all these reasons that they should be able to be built more efficiently. I think we got to prove that. And I think the best way to do that is to build some. And so I think this decade, we have to build these examples so people can see it, they can understand it, they can understand the cost profile and appreciate, again, the carbon-free investment. You know, as we think of nuclear today and we talk about electricity, but when you really think about your question and you think about what the president is encouraging, it's not just electricity, it's the entire economy. So think about that nuclear plant of the future. It can produce electricity if that's what you need. It can make hydrogen if that's what you want. It can make high temperature steam if that's a commodity that's interesting to you. And when you're trying to figure out how to decarbonize the steel industry and how to decarbonize these other large industries, they might just need the high temperature steam as part of helping their processes. And so that nuclear plant of the future, it's not just the energy workhorse, it's actually going to help decarbonize the entire economy.
George, let me just come to you and ask about what are the, there's been a pitch here for a lot of arguments about the importance, at the very least, of continuing to operate TVAs and focus on TVA as an example. There are other, obviously, reactors that are going to go through relicensing in the next decade to stay online. Does TVA have a real challenge in keeping those reactors operating for the next decade? Let's use the 2030 timeframe.
I don't think so. I mean, you know, the work we did there and our knowledge of the industry says, you know, that the expected lives of these plants are robust, and there's a critical role for these plants to play in our energy stack in this country for the foreseeable future because of the current state of the technology and the other objectives we've cited as a country, and because of the cost profile of those plants. So I don't think there's you know, any issue with the TVA fleet. The broader point, which there's just violent agreement on, is all generation plants need to be run safely and efficiently and securely, and that's something TVA focuses upon, and that's what all nuclear operators in this country focus upon in a way that is best in class in that regard, in our view.
Karen, let me ask you one last question, and then we'll try to do a single question around to finish up because we just have about 8 or 9 minutes left. One of the more successful efforts in the past to do development in Appalachia has been through the Appalachian Regional Commission, which is a way to sort of deal with federal funding, state involvement, communities, counties, local groups, nonprofits. How is the task force going to, is there a way to have a new organization that creates this all levels of government, not all of government, but talking about small towns, counties, and states, and a bunch of federal agencies? Is there a way to make that more of a permanent process?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, the ARC has been an important part of, we've been privileged to work with them as we've been working through these issues. And we were really pleased that the president appointed Senator Manchin's wife to sit on the board of the Appalachian Regional Commission just a couple of weeks ago. The intention is that the stakeholder engagement around this working group will become formalized and take on the form of something like a FACA, something like an institution within the government that is ongoing and permanent. And it will
a formal federal advisory committee, which is a formal substance.
Right. Not to be replaced with, however, getting into the community. So, for example, my boss, Secretary Granholm is going to Appalachia in a few weeks. And I think that the principals from throughout the federal government who are involved in some of these issues will be hitting the road and sitting down in communities and talking to people who have been working on these issues for many, many years. And we've engaged them. Again, it's been a privilege to work with some, businesses in Appalachia, nonprofits, philanthropy, universities, who have been working in this area for quite a while. And the idea is to knit these together and create a woven, bridge that is continuously active with ideas and developing asset maps for what exists in the communities that could be leveraged and taken advantage of, and where there are huge gaps where the government might be able to come in with partners to help out.
Great, thank you. Telehealth. That's why broadband is important. You can train people and provide health care to the community and train people in not only cyber skills, but telehealth skills to go elsewhere and come back. An idea. Well, this has been very interesting and quite informative. I thought maybe I would just ask each of you one question, take a minute. And maybe it's an unfair question, but is there one thing or one or two things that you'll look to over the coming months and year or so to make some judgment about whether the administration is on the right path to make energy transition an economic driver and job creator? Are there one or two signals or signs or things you look for that look promising? George, start with you.
Yeah, I think that more language linking the energy transition to economic development would be a positive, and also trying to make sure that we're reaching across the aisle. Folks are reaching across the aisle. Because of the economic scarring from the global pandemic, which is not fully evident right now, is a lot of focus on precision of capital allocation through the federal budget. So we're going to have limited resources. We have limited resources. So how do those resources get allocated in the most efficient way for all stakeholders?
JT.
Yeah, kind of, George, as I said earlier, and I agree with the other George, energy is not optional. And one of the things that I think would be a great signal is to recognize the importance of people who the fabric of the community. And one of the things I really appreciate by the signals I've seen so far from the administration is the consideration of the impact of the transition on people, on families. That is going to be crucial, because as we make this transition, we want to make sure that everyone's lifted and everyone has an opportunity and has a seat at the table. So it's really important. We've seen how important it is as we went through an integrated resource plan last year, getting input from the community, getting input from people regarding their needs and desires. I think that's so important. So remember the words I used earlier that I think our customers really expect is that resilient, reliable, low cost energy. And it's in everything we do. Energy is a part of that. There's nothing we can do where we could say energy doesn't matter. It always does. And so I think that would be a great signal from the administration.
Thank you, Brent.
I would point to a couple of things that we've touched on already. You know, the continued investment and signals from the administration about the existing nuclear fleet, about SMRs, about CCS, I think would be very well received and very positive from the administration. And then secondly, some things that they've already done when looking at the offshore wind industry, where we've been very engaged with BOEM, Department of Interior, Secretary of Energy, and the president himself, who says, you know, and from all of those I just said, they've all said not just good jobs, they said these have to be union jobs because we know what it means when it's a union job. So as we transition out of the existing energy into the new energy, to make sure that there's policies in place, to mention the 4 or 5 things I mentioned earlier that are important to us, to make sure that these are union jobs. And to have them to say that over and over again gives all the signals we need to investors and others in the energy sector.
Thank you. Karen, it may be unfair to ask you this question since you're in the cockpit more than any of these other people.
Yeah, this is like my report card. What do I want to see on it? You know, it comes down to just, you know, jobs, and jobs. I work for a secretary who says her hair is on fire about getting jobs. And Brent's right. I mean, we don't just talk about any job. We talk about good, quality, high-paying union jobs. That's not to say that every single job that's going to be created is going to be a union job, but that is absolutely the goal and the kind of quality of job that we intend to produce. The secretary has named the first ever Office of Energy Jobs at the Department of Energy, and we're focused on it like a laser. So if I don't create some jobs in the next short while, I feel like we will have failed.
Maria.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I would say the signals we're looking for from this administration to help embrace this carbon-free future would be technology-neutral frameworks that put nuclear energy on an even playing field with other carbon-free sources. As we've said, we need to preserve the capacity of our existing fleet, and we need to increase funding for R&D for that future fleet. And I'll jump on that jobs message. I think we can encourage the transition from a fossil fleet to these good-paying nuclear jobs.
Maria, thank you. I think we're right at the end. So I want to thank all of our panelists as well as Senator Manchin and Jeff Lyash for participating, and thanks to you who are listening for joining today. I also want to thank Jennifer Gordon, Kelsey Foran, Emily Burlinghouse, Zainab Winonen, Jackson Styron, and the Atlantic Council team for their work in organizing and helping us present this program. If you'd like to rewatch the panel or share the stream with a colleague, you can find a recording on the Atlantic Council website and our YouTube channel. So thanks again for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.